Hello everyone, and welcome to Lancelot's Nerd Corner, where I'm proud to present another 6-scale figure review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Batman by InArt, but this time, we'll be trying something different. Since I already reviewed the Hot Toys Batman relatively recently, earlier this year, I felt it would be a bit redundant to go through the exact same version of the exact same character in the same way. So, instead, we'll be taking a comparative look at both of them, where I'll be pointing out any similarities or differences between them, and at the end, I'll reveal which of them I personally think is best. Today, we'll just be taking a look at the head sculpts specifically, with the full comparison review coming next week, so make sure you're subscribed to stay tuned. All around, they're actually quite different, way more different than I was expecting actually, and it really shows how small but many changes can completely change the look of the final product. The most obvious thing you'll probably notice is that the head on the Hot Toys looks way bigger, especially around the temples and forehead. And in fact, now that I have something to compare the Hot Toys to, the proportions do look a bit silly, and the InArts just looks a lot more well proportioned. As a result, the bat ears on the InArt sculpt look slightly taller since the forehead and the back of the head isn't so big. The leather grain is sculpted slightly differently between them as well, but I don't think that's really a huge deal. And I don't really have a comment on which looks better or more accurate, it's just something to point out. Just like how the stitching on the InArt cowl is less dirty and grimy than on the Hot Toys. I don't think it's a huge deal, but just something to be aware of. The scratches on both cowls are in roughly the same size, but have slightly different placements. And on Hot Toys, they look a bit deeper. One really subtle but important difference are the eyes. InArt's eyes are sculpted more sunken in, whereas Hot Toys is much shallower. The brow line on the cowl of the InArt is also a bit lower, so you don't see as much of the eyes, especially when tilting the head down. I do think this is more accurate, especially when you round it out with the last detail that InArt captured, which is the slight squint in the eyes, which is something Robert Pattinson did a lot in the movie. Looking at the Hot Toys eyes, I never knew how much I needed this tiny detail, because it completely elevates the sculpt. Now let's talk about the face sculpt, and there are quite a few things separating them. The most obvious difference is the skin tone. InArt's is much paler, which I think is more accurate, whereas Hot Toys is way more tan. Both have subtle shading to show beard stubble, and while both also have great skin texturing, I do think InArt looks more realistic. The lips are also sculpted very similarly, they're just painted differently. And I noticed the small detail on the InArt sculpt of the very bottom of the nose sticking out underneath the cowl. Both Hot Toys and InArt provide 2 additional face sculpts, and both went with very similar expressions, one slightly open and one gritting teeth. The Hot Toys teeth are sculpted and painted better in my opinion, they're just a very odd color compared to the InArts. And for both figures, they're attached by magnets. Hot Toys and InArt both chose to separate the head from the neck, but they executed it differently. With Hot Toys, they completely separated them, and the head attaches with a magnet. This does allow for a much wider range of motion than the InArt, because the InArt attaches with a slip peg, and as a result, it restricts the head's ability to tilt up, since it's still connected to the neck. Speaking of the neck, this is a great time to talk about the collar, because it was probably the most criticized aspect of the Hot Toys Batman. The main problem was that it was just too small, making it unnecessarily tight. Not only was this inaccurate, but it also hampered the head articulation, as well as making inserting the Bruce Wayne head sculpt a huge pain in the ass for a lot of people. Another adverse side effect of the tight collar is that it makes the head look too big and the neck too skinny, further emphasizing the fact that the Hot Toys head sculpt just looks too disproportionate. InArt's collar, on the other hand, I think is perfect, and you can clearly see the space in between it and the neck, and as a result, the head sculpt as a whole looks perfectly proportioned. Lastly, both head sculpts provide a rolling eye function and are accessed the same way. Underneath the sculpt, you can see the pegs, which you move with your fingers, and with Hot Toys, it's a little bit easier, whereas I think InArt doesn't give you quite enough space to move them as easily. Now let's move on to the Bruce Wayne head sculpt. And similarly to the cowl, the most obvious difference is the size, because the Hot Toys sculpt is much bigger. However, to be fair, once it's on the figure, the InArt head sculpt looks a bit too small. The neck on the Hot Toys sculpt also looks comically long, but you do need to use this separate neck piece, whereas with InArt they already sculpted the neck piece as part of their head sculpt. The long neck may be an advantage though for Hot Toys, as it allows more movement side to side. And again, the skin tone is very different between the two, with InArt having the more accurate, pale complexion. Everything else is quite similar. I think the likeness is captured really well on both, but oddly enough there are some angles where I think the InArt likeness looks better, and others where the Hot Toys looks better. Both of them also are painted really well, I just think the InArt has the slight edge on skin texturing. And while the eye makeup is painted a bit differently between them, I still think both look fantastic. One subtle thing I noticed is that the expression on the Hot Toys sculpt looks a bit more intense, whereas the InArt's is a little bit too cold and unfeeling for me. Both hair sculpts are tremendous, showing clear layers, shapes, and clumps of hair, but I do think Hot Toys is slightly better. It just looks more natural and realistic to me. Hot Toys also does offer an alternative hair sculpt, which is what I'm showing right now, whereas InArt does not. I don't think this is really a big deal though, since this messy sculpt is the better look anyway. Lastly, both Bruce Wayne head sculpts have rolling eyes function, and again are accessed the same way. You remove the back of the head, which is attached by magnets, and again use your fingers to move the eyes individually. On that note, I am a bit disappointed in InArt for abandoning the parallel eye rolling function that they had with the Joker, as it's way more convenient and not to mention more realistic. I think both sculpts are done incredibly well, and each have their own merits and constraints, which I hope you've also recognized by the end of this. That being said, in my humble opinion, I do think when it comes to the Cowled head sculpt, InArt is the better of the two. It's more well proportioned, the face sculpt is better, and the eyes truly sell the realism and accuracy for me. However, when it comes to the Bruce Wayne head sculpt, Hot Toys has my vote on this one. While I think both are great, I prefer the expression as well as the hair sculpt on the Hot Toys, and ironically, I think this sculpt is more well proportioned than InArt's. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this review helpful, please feel free to like and subscribe, especially because the full figure comparison review is coming soon. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.